Christmas 1918 came and went. Some men tried to make it festive, strung up decorations, sang carols, pretended things were normal. I couldn't participate. Christmas was supposed to mean something, but all meaning had leaked out of me somewhere in the mud. The Army kept us busy with pointless tasks, drills, inspections, marching formations, busy work to keep idle hands occupied. They were afraid of what might happen if we had too much time to think. They were right to be afraid. Mail from home started catching up with us. Letters that had been written months ago, crossing the Atlantic while we were still fighting. My mother's letters were full of joy. The war was over. I was safe. I'd be coming home soon. She'd already started planning a celebration. How could I tell her that the boy who left Sacramento in 1918 wasn't coming back? That something else was returning in his place? I tried to write back. Sat there for hours with pen and paper, but the words wouldn't come. What do you say? Dear Mother, I killed men. I watched my friends die. I can't sleep without seeing their faces. The silence is louder than the guns ever were. You don't write those things, so you write nothing. In January, they started shipping units home. Not us. The 91st Division was occupation duty, had to stay. We watched other soldiers board trains, heading for the ports, heading for America. They looked happy, relieved. We tried not to hate them for it. Jack's nightmares got worse. He wasn't sleeping more than an hour or two a night. His hands shook constantly. He'd lost weight, and he hadn't had much to lose. Morrison tried to get him to the medical officer, but Jack refused. They'll say I'm shell-shocked, he said. They'll write it down somewhere. I can't have that on my record. Shell-shocked. That's what they called it when your mind broke. Like it was shameful. Like it was weakness. Like anyone who'd spent months in those trenches wouldn't be fundamentally altered by it. We were all shell-shocked. Some of us just hid it better. February brought influenza. The Spanish flu had been killing people since 18, but it hit the occupation forces hard. Men who'd survived 4 years of war died coughing in field hospitals. The irony wasn't lost on us. Survived the guns only to be killed by a virus. Henderson died of the flu. The kid who'd asked what we do when the fighting stops. He never made it home to find out. I wrote to his mother, told her he'd been brave, that he'd died peacefully, that he hadn't suffered. All lies. He'd drowned in his own lungs over 3 days, terrified and alone. But you don't tell mothers the truth. By March, I'd stopped counting days. Time became this shapeless thing, stretching out in all directions. The war was over 4 months gone, but it felt like yesterday, and also like it had never ended at all. We got word we'd be shipping home in April. 4 months we'd been waiting. 4 months of existing in this limbo between war and peace, between who we'd been and who we'd become. The night before we left, Jack and I got drunk, really drunk, on terrible French wine that tasted like vinegar and regret. We didn't talk much, just sat there in the gathering darkness, 2 men who'd survived something that couldn't be survived. You think it'll be different back home? Jack asked finally. You think we'll feel normal again? I wanted to lie to him, wanted to say yes, that time would heal us, that we'd forget and move on and become the men we'd been before. But I couldn't. No, I said. I don't think so. He nodded, took another drink. Yeah, me neither. We sailed from Brest in mid-April. The sea was gray and cold, choppy enough to make men sick. I stood on deck and watched France disappear behind us. Good riddance, I thought. But the war was coming with us. It was in our heads, in our blood, in every cell of our bodies. You can't leave it behind when it's become part of you. The ship was full of men singing, celebrating, talking about what they'd do when they got home. Girls they'd see, jobs they'd get, lives they'd rebuild. Their voices sounded distant, like they were coming from underwater. Jack didn't talk about Boston anymore, didn't talk about much of anything. Just stared at the horizon with that 1,000-yard stare we all recognized. The look of someone whose soul was somewhere else. 10 days at sea, 10 days of gray water and grayer thoughts, 10 days of moving toward home while feeling further from it with every mile. When we saw the Statue of Liberty, men cheered, threw their hats in the air. Some cried. I felt that same numbness, that same disconnection. The statue looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I'd just gotten smaller, hollowed out by silence and survivors' guilt and the knowledge that I didn't deserve to be standing on this deck when so many better men were still in France, feeding the soil. New York Harbor was chaos, crowds everywhere, bands playing, confetti falling like snow, people screaming and waving flags, holding up signs welcoming heroes home. The noise was overwhelming after months of relative quiet. It pushed against my skull, made me want to crawl somewhere dark and silent. We marched through the streets. Ticker-tape parade, they called it. Thousands of people lining the route, cheering, crying, reaching out to touch us like we were saints or saviors. Pretty girls threw flowers, old men saluted, children waved little American flags. I kept my eyes forward and marched, one foot in front of the other. That's all I knew how to do anymore. A reporter pushed through the crowd, shoved a notepad at me. How does it feel to be home, soldier? How does it feel to have won the war? Won, like it was a game, like there were winners. I didn't answer him, couldn't. Morrison pulled me along before I did something I'd regret. They threw a banquet for us at some fancy hotel. White tablecloths, silver cutlery, food I'd dreamed about in the trenches. Roast beef, fresh bread, vegetables that weren't from a can. Men ate like they were starving, which I suppose we were in a way. Not just for food. I couldn't eat. The meat looked too red. Reminded me of things I didn't want to remember. A society woman came up to our table, all pearls and perfume. She wanted to hear war stories. What was it like? She asked, eyes bright with curiosity. Were you frightened? Did you kill any Germans? Jack stood up so fast his chair fell over, walked out without a word. I found him later in an alley behind the hotel, vomiting into a trash can. I can't do this, he said, wiping his mouth. I can't smile and nod and pretend it was some grand adventure. I can't. I know, I said. Because I did know. We all knew. They put us on trains to our hometowns. Mine stopped in Chicago to transfer, and that's where I lost Jack. He was supposed to change trains for Boston, but when we got off to stretch our legs, he just kept walking, disappeared into the crowd. I never saw him again. Found out years later he'd jumped off a bridge in Boston in 1921. His sister wrote to me, asked if I knew why. I didn't know how to tell her that he'd died in France in 1918, that what came back was just going through the motions until his body caught up with the truth. Sacramento looked exactly the same. That was the worst part. The buildings, the streets, the familiar faces, all untouched by the war. Like it had happened on another planet, in another lifetime. My family met me at the station. My mother cried, clutched me to her chest like I was still a child. My father shook my hand, pride and worry fighting in his eyes. My sister kept asking questions about France, about the fighting, about everything. I smiled and lied and felt nothing. They'd prepared a feast, invited neighbors, family friends, half the Chinese community in Sacramento. Everyone wanted to celebrate the war hero, the local boy who'd done his duty. They toasted me, told stories about how brave I must have been, how proud they were. I excused myself halfway through, went to my old room, the one I'd left when I enlisted. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. My books, my clothes, my childhood things. But I didn't recognize any of it. This had been someone else's room. Some boy who didn't exist anymore. I tried to sleep in my old bed that night. Couldn't do it. Too soft, too quiet, too safe. I ended up on the floor with a blanket, and even then I didn't sleep. Just lay there listening to the silence, waiting for shells that would never come. The nightmares started worse at home than they'd been in France. In France, at least they made sense. At home, they felt like an invasion. Like the war had followed me across the ocean to poison everything I'd tried to come back to. My mother would hear me screaming. She'd come to my door but wouldn't come in, like she was afraid of what she might see. In the morning, she'd ask if I was all right, and I'd lie and say yes. I tried to work in the family laundry, tried to care about starch and pressing and customer orders. But my hands would shake when doors slammed. I'd dive behind the counter when trucks backfired in the street. Once I grabbed a customer by the throat because he'd come up behind me without warning. They stopped letting me work the front of the shop after that. People meant well. They'd thank me for my service, tell me I was a hero, ask about the war with that gleam in their eyes, that hunger for stories that would make them feel part of something important. I learned to give them what they wanted, sanitized versions, stripped of truth. Yes, France was beautiful. Yes, we gave the Germans what for. Yes, I was proud to serve. No, I didn't have any regrets. All lies, every word. The only truth I told was to other veterans. There was a VFW hall downtown where men would gather, men who'd been over there. We didn't talk much about the war directly, didn't have to. We recognized each other by the way we startled at sudden noises, by the way we couldn't meet anyone's eyes for too long, by the way we drank too much and laughed too loud at things that weren't funny. We were trying to drown something that couldn't be drowned. I started drinking seriously around 1920. Not at first. At first it was just a little something to help me sleep. Then it was something to get through the day. Then it was the only thing that made the world bearable. My father tried to talk to me about it, gentle at first, then more insistent. Said I was throwing my life away, that I needed to pull myself together, that the war was over and I needed to move on. Move on. Like it was that simple. Like you could just decide to forget and have it be done. It's been 40 years since the Armistice. 40 years since that silence crashed down like a weight, heavier than all the shelling that came before it. People call it the Great War now. The war to end all wars, they said back then. That lasted all of 20 years before they started the whole thing over again. World War I, they call it now, like they're already planning for number 3. My sister's grandson asked me about it last week. He's studying it in school, wants to know what it was really like. His teacher told him about the glory and the sacrifice and the brave American doughboys who saved Europe. I didn't know where to start. How do you explain to a child that war isn't about glory, that the armistice wasn't the happy ending everyone pretends it was? I told him the guns stopped at 11 o'clock, that we could hear birds singing, that men cried. He seemed disappointed, like he wanted something more exciting, something with heroes and villains and clear victories. War doesn't work like that. There are no victories, not really, just survivors and the dead, and sometimes it's hard to tell which is which. I never married. Tried once in the 20s. Sweet girl named Margaret who worked at the library. She was patient with me, with my moods and my nightmares and the days I couldn't get out of bed. But patience has limits. She left after I woke up screaming one night and nearly hit her before I realized where I was. I can't compete with your ghosts, she said. She was right. The ghosts always won. I've worked a dozen different jobs over the years. Never could hold one for long. The drinking didn't help, and neither did the way I'd freeze up when things got too loud or too chaotic. Employers want reliable workers. I stopped being reliable on November 11th, 1918. The laundry business stayed in the family, but I couldn't be part of it. My father ran it until he died in '35. My sister took over after that. They let me help sometimes with the books or the inventory. Quiet work in the back where I wouldn't scare customers. I've been living in the apartment above the laundry for 20 years now. Small place, just a room and a bathroom and a hot plate. It's enough. More than I deserve, probably. The nightmares never stopped. They changed over the years. Sometimes I'm back in the trenches. Sometimes I'm watching the Armistice happen over and over. Sometimes I'm trying to save men who are already dead. But they never stopped. I stopped drinking in '52. Not because I wanted to, but because my liver started failing and the doctor said it would kill me. Maybe that would have been a mercy, but my body was too stubborn to quit even when my mind had given up decades ago. Without the alcohol, everything got sharper, clearer. The memories came back in vivid detail, colors and sounds and smells I'd spent 30 years trying to blur. The silence of the Armistice rings in my ears every day, louder than the guns ever were. I see them sometimes, my dead friends, not ghosts exactly, just memories so strong they feel real. Frank Kowalski, who died taking a piss. Henderson, who died of flu after surviving the fighting. Jack Sullivan, who made it home only to find home didn't exist anymore. They're younger than me now. I'm an old man of 62, and they're still 22, still trapped in 1918, still waiting for something that will never come. People ask me if I'm glad we won, if I think it was worth it. I don't know how to answer that. We stopped the Germans, sure. Saved Belgium and France from occupation. That mattered to someone, I suppose. But the cost, millions dead, millions more like me, broken men pretending to be whole, going through the motions of living while feeling nothing inside. Was it worth that? I can't say. I don't have enough pieces left of myself to make that judgment. What I know is this. The Armistice didn't end the war. It just ended the fighting. The war itself never stopped. Not for me, not for any of us who were there. It just moved from the trenches into our heads, where it's been killing us slowly ever since. They're all gone now. Morrison died in '45. Most of the men I served with are dead or disappeared. I'm one of the last ones left, carrying memories no one wants to hear. The history books will say we won. They'll talk about American heroism and German defeat and the dawn of a new era. They'll reduce 4 years of slaughter to paragraphs, to dates and battle names and casualty statistics. They won't mention the silence. Won't mention how it felt to survive when better men didn't. Won't mention the 40 years of nightmares and failed relationships and jobs lost and lives wasted. They won't mention that the boy who enlisted in 1918 never came home. That what returned was something else. A shell, a ghost. A man who learned to fake being alive while dying inside. The Armistice happened at 11 o'clock on November 11th, 1918. But for me, for all of us who were there, it never really came. We're still in those trenches, still waiting for the guns to stop, still hoping for a silence that brings peace instead of just absence. My sister tells me I should write these things down, that future generations should know what it was really like. But what's the point? They wouldn't believe it anyway. And even if they did, they'd do it all over again. They already did. 1939 to 1945. Different war, same horror. My nephew went. Came back looking like I must have looked in 1919. Hollow eyes, shaking hands, that distance between himself and the world. We don't talk about it. What would we say? We both know the truth that civilians never will. War doesn't end. It just pauses, takes a breath, finds new victims. Sometimes I think about that moment, 11 o'clock, the guns stopping, the silence falling like snow. Everyone thought it was the end. Liberation. Victory. Peace. It wasn't the end of anything. It was just the moment we stopped dying from bullets and started dying from memory. I'm 62 years old. I've been dead for 40 years. I'm just waiting for my body to realize it and stop pretending otherwise. When I die, really die, physically die, maybe I'll finally come home. Maybe I'll find my friends again, the ones who died in France, the ones who died here in America from wounds no one could see. Maybe then the silence will finally mean peace instead of just absence. But I doubt it. The silence is louder than you'd think, and it never, ever stops. Silence is louder than you'd think. People ask me about the Armistice like it was the happiest day of my life. Like the moment the guns stopped, everything was sunshine and ticker tape parades. They want me to tell them we cheered, that we threw our helmets in the air, that we cried tears of joy. I can't give them that story. Because the silence, that terrible, unnatural silence, it was the worst sound I ever heard. My name's Robert Chen. My family came through Angel Island from Guangdong province when I was 8 years old. We settled in Sacramento, ran a laundry. When the war came, I enlisted in the 91st Infantry Division. Wanted to prove I was American as anyone. Wanted to show that a Chinese kid could fight for his country too. Funny thing about wanting to prove yourself, you might actually get the chance. We shipped out in July 1918. By then, the war had been going for 4 years. France was exhausted. Britain was exhausted. Germany was exhausted. Everyone was exhausted except us, fresh American boys who didn't know any better. They put us in the Meuse-Argonne sector in September. I won't talk much about that offensive. That's its own nightmare, 47 days of hell. But we were there, pushing forward, bleeding for every yard when November came around. By early November, we all knew something was changing. The Germans were falling back faster. Rumors flew through the trenches. Peace talks, negotiations, Germany collapsing from the inside. We'd been hearing rumors for months, though. The war will be over by Christmas. We'd heard that one since 1914. Nobody believed anymore. Believing got you killed. I was in a reserve position on November 10th near a ruined village called Mouzon. We'd been rotated back after 3 weeks on the line. My platoon, what was left of it, we were supposed to get rest. But rest doesn't mean much when the artillery never stops. You just die a little slower. Lieutenant Morrison came around that evening. British accent, officer class, the kind who'd gone to fancy schools before the war made us all equal in the mud. He told us to clean our rifles, check our ammunition. There was talk of one more push in the morning. One more push, always one more push. Jack Sullivan from Boston, he laughed when Morrison left. Not a happy laugh. The kind of laugh men make when they've gone somewhere else inside their heads. They're gonna kill us on the last goddamn day, he said. That'd be just perfect, wouldn't it? We'd lost Frank Kowalski the week before. Sniper got him while he was taking a piss. Before that, it was Jimmy Hayes, then Robert Murphy, then both the Wilson brothers on the same day. The replacements didn't last long enough to learn their names. I remember sitting there in the dugout that night, November 10th, cleaning my Springfield rifle for the 1,000th time. My hands did it automatically. Field strip, oil, reassemble. Didn't even have to think about it anymore. Thinking was dangerous anyway. The guns kept firing all night. German artillery, our artillery, back and forth like some insane conversation that never ended. The ground shook. It always shook. I'd forgotten what solid ground felt like. At 0500 hours on November 11th, they woke us up. Morrison had new orders. The attack was off. Stand ready, but hold position. Something was happening. We didn't believe it, couldn't afford to believe it. At 1000 hours, Morrison came back. His face was different, not happy exactly, more like stunned, like he'd been hit but didn't feel it yet. "The fighting stops at 1100 hours, he said. "Armistice. It's over. Over." Such a simple word. Such an impossible word. Nobody knew what to do with that information. We just stood there in the trench, looking at each other, waiting for someone to tell us it was a joke or a mistake or a German trick. "Over," Jack repeated, tasting the word. Just like that. Morrison nodded. He pulled out his pocket watch. Nice silver thing, probably family heirloom. 53 minutes, he said. At 1100 hours, all hostilities cease. 53 minutes, less than an hour. After 4 years, after millions dead, it came down to 53 minutes. The strangest thing happened then. The Germans kept fighting, and so did we. You'd think both sides would just stop, wait out the clock. But the artillery kept pounding. Machine guns kept rattling in the distance. Men kept dying while the minute hand crawled toward 11. We could hear an attack happening somewhere to our south. American boys going over the top with minutes left. The sound of it, the desperate fury of men trying to grab one last piece of ground, or maybe just trying to kill a few more of the enemy before the chance was gone forever. Later, I learned that soldiers died at 10:59 a.m., 1 minute before the armistice. Died for ground that wouldn't matter in 60 seconds. I sat on the fire step and watched the second hand on Morrison's watch. He'd set it on the parapet where we could all see it. 10:45, 10:50, 10:55. The guns were still firing, louder now, if anything, like both sides wanted to get in every last shot, fire every last shell, squeeze out every last drop of killing before the tap turned off. Jack was shaking. Not from fear. We'd burned through fear months ago. Just shaking, like his body didn't know what to do with the knowledge that in 5 minutes, 4 minutes, 3 minutes, he might actually survive this thing. "What do we do?" someone asked. "Private Henderson, I think. Young kid, just arrived 2 weeks ago. When it stops, I mean. What do we do?" Nobody answered him. We didn't know. 10:58. I thought about my mother in Sacramento. She lit incense for me every day at the family altar, praying I'd come home. My kid sister wrote me letters full of neighborhood gossip and questions about France. Did they really have a tower made of iron? Was the food as good as everyone said? I'd stopped answering her questions, couldn't tell her the truth, couldn't bring myself to lie. 10:59. The shelling reached a crescendo, every gun on both sides firing at once, like some final, furious argument that had to be settled right now, this instant, before the opportunity was lost forever. Jack was crying, tears just running down his dirty face, leaving clean tracks through the mud and powder burns. 1100 hours. The guns stopped, not gradually, not a slow falling off, just stopped. Like someone had thrown a switch and cut the power to the whole war. The silence hit like a physical thing, like a wave, like pressure in your ears that wouldn't pop. For 4 years, this part of France had never known quiet. The guns had been firing since 1914, day and night, an endless thunder that got into your bones and your brain until you couldn't remember what the world sounded like without it. And then nothing. Henderson started laughing. High-pitched, hysterical. Morrison slapped him, not hard, just enough to stop the sound. The silence closed back in. We could hear birds. I swear to God, we could hear birds. When did birds come back? They'd all fled years ago, driven away by the noise and the gas and the death. But there they were, singing somewhere in the shattered trees. A German soldier stood up from their trench. Just stood up, about 50 yards away. We could see him clearly. young, thin, filthy like us. He took off his helmet. Nobody shot him. More men stood up, on both sides. Americans, Germans, French further down the line, just standing there looking at each other across the blasted wasteland that separated us. Someone started cheering. Somewhere far off, you could hear it. Men cheering, celebrating. The sound seemed wrong, obscene against that silence. Jack was still crying. "It's over," he kept saying. "It's over, it's over, it's over." But he said it like a question, not a statement. Like he needed someone to confirm it, to make it real. I don't know how long we stood there. Minutes, maybe hours. Time felt broken, like the absence of shelling had stopped the clock somehow. Morrison finally spoke. Right then, he said, voice hoarse, I suppose we should do something. But what? What do you do when the thing that's defined your existence for months or years just ends? We'd spent so long learning how to survive war that nobody had taught us how to survive peace. Men started climbing out of the trenches, carefully at first, expecting sniper fire that didn't come. Then more boldly, walking across no man's land like it was just regular ground now, not the killing field it had been 5 minutes ago. Some Germans were doing the same. We met in the middle, in the crater-marked mud between the lines. Nobody knew what to say. They looked like us, exhausted, filthy, hollow-eyed. One of them offered me a cigarette. German tobacco, harsh as hell, but I smoked it. We didn't shake hands, didn't embrace, didn't really talk. Just stood there, these groups of men who'd been trying to kill each other, suddenly sharing the same incomprehensible moment. A French soldier further down the line was screaming, not in pain, in rage. He was shooting into the air, emptying his rifle at the sky, shouting things I couldn't understand. His friends had to wrestle the gun away from him. That's when it started to sink in. The silence wasn't peace. It was just absence. Absence of the noise, absence of the dying, but not absence of what the war had done to us. We walked back to the reserve area, past the aid station where they'd stacked the morning's dead, men who'd died at 10:55, at 10:58, at 10:59 and 30 seconds. Died for nothing. Died because some general somewhere wanted one more attack, one more victory to write in the history books before the war ended. Lieutenant Morrison went into a dugout and didn't come out for hours. The celebration started that evening. Officers broke out champagne they'd been hoarding. Someone found a piano in a half-destroyed house and dragged it out. Men danced, sang, drank themselves stupid. The French girls from the nearby villages came out, kissing any soldier they could find. I sat on an ammunition box and watched. Felt nothing. That numbness I'd developed over the months, the emotional callus that kept you sane, it didn't just switch off because the guns did. Jack was drinking straight from a wine bottle, laughing now instead of crying. "We made it, Chen," he shouted at me. "We goddamn made it." But Frank Kowalski hadn't made it. Jimmy Hayes hadn't made it. The Wilson brothers, Private Henderson's entire squad, that kid from Tennessee whose name I never learned, they hadn't made it. Why did I make it? What made me special? What made me more deserving of survival than any of them? The questions started that night. They've never stopped. Over the next few days, the reality of it settled in like fog. The war was over, but we were still here, still in France, still wearing these uniforms, still seeing those faces when we closed our eyes. They marched us through German towns as part of the occupation. The civilians watched us with dead eyes. Their sons and husbands hadn't all made it either. We were supposed to feel victorious, I guess. Supposed to feel proud that we'd beaten them. I just felt tired. Some men couldn't handle the sudden peace. Private Baker from Michigan shot himself 3 days after the Armistice. Just walked out behind the latrines and put his rifle in his mouth. Nobody tried to explain it or make sense of it. We all understood in a way. The silence was the worst part. My ears kept ringing. Phantom artillery that wasn't there. I'd wake up at night in a panic, certain I'd overslept through a barrage, that shells were falling and I needed to find cover. But there was only quiet. Quiet and the faces of dead men. We stayed in France for months. They didn't know what to do with us, I think. Couldn't just ship millions of soldiers home overnight. So we waited, occupying a country that hated us, occupying bodies that didn't feel like ours anymore. Jack started having nightmares, violent ones. He'd wake up swinging, screaming about Germans in the trench. One night he nearly strangled Henderson before Morrison and I could pull him off. "I'm sorry," Jack kept saying afterward, shaking. I'm sorry. I thought..." We knew what he thought. We all thought it. The war was over on paper, but in our heads it kept going. Kept going every night, every time we closed our eyes, every time a door slammed or a cart backfired or thunder rolled across the sky. They told us we were heroes, told us we'd saved democracy, made the world safe. President Wilson came to France, gave speeches about peace and justice and the dawning of a new age. I stood in formation and listened and felt nothing. The world hadn't learned anything. How could it? The people who stayed home, who cheered us off and waved flags, they had no idea what we'd seen, no idea what we'd become. You can't make the world safe for democracy by destroying the men who fight for it.